If you'll turn with me to Psalm 34, verse 8. Again, that's Psalm 34, verse 8. And it reads in this manner, "O taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man that trusteth in him." Our subject this evening is "In God We Trust." Understand that one of the hardest things to do is to trust in something or someone that you cannot see. As human beings, we tend to believe in what we see. Seemingly, our belief in or trust in is not set into motion until we have actually seen with our eyes. This is called visual perception. A visual perception is the ability to interpret your surrounding environment by processing information that is contained in visible light. This perception is known as eyesight. Just a few days ago, on October 29, 2012, Americans in New York City experienced a type of visual perception by the name of Hurricane Sandy. Hurricane Sandy slammed into the East Coast, and in just a few hours, 800,000 New Yorkers were without power because of high winds, fires, and floods. The floodwaters caused backup generators in Lagone Medical Center to fail, and this failure forced the medical center's management to evacuate all the patients. One of these evacuees was a 3-week-old baby by the name of Emma, whose parents were at home recovering. By the time the evacuation was underway, Manhattan was nearly sealed off from the world, with its bridges and tunnels closed, keeping new mom and dad away from their newborn. Much like most of us today, Emma's parents thought the worst. Why? Because of what they were looking at. This is a type of visual perception. They were looking at the high winds blowing, they were looking at the fires blazing, and they were looking at the waters rising. So upon hearing of the destruction path of Hurricane Sandy, Governor Mitt Romney decided to cancel his campaign trip to Virginia. Why? Because of what he was looking at. He was looking and not seeing. This was his type of visual perception. On the other hand, we have President Barack Obama cancel his campaign trip so that he can go into the storm to ensure that all the departments were ready for after the storm. See, we must understand that one of the greatest downfalls to man is looking and not seeing. We have looked so much at the problem that we have missed seeing God in the midst of our lives, in the midst of our hurricanes. See, understand that trusting God requires seeing God in the middle of the storm. Trusting God is not as simple as saying, "God, I trust you." Rather, we should say, "God, I see you." And God, I'm going through, but I see you. In the middle of the storm, but God, I see you. It is in the 34th Psalm we find David, who was on the run and finds refuge in the land of his enemies. He is living in caves, and yet he is seeing God. It is with this dark time in David's life that he invites us to trust God. So the question still stands, how does David learn to trust God? See, there are 3 key components to trusting God that we see here in Psalm 34, verse 8, and that is tasting God, seeing God, and experiencing his goodness. Tasting God, seeing God, and experiencing his goodness. Now, for today, we're going to look at one of these key components, or one of these key steps, and that is that David trusted God by seeing God. See, understand that it is human nature to want to see in order to believe. However, it is difficult to see God in the middle of our Hurricane Sandy. Oftentimes, our seeing is blinded by our looking. And once the eye has seen the goodness of God, trust is set into motion. See, our belief is that if I can see it, then I can believe it. And God is trying to tell us here today that if we can see him in the middle of our storm, that we can trust him right where we are. We don't have to wait until we get out. But if we see him right now, we can trust him now and thank him for it later. After all that David had been through in his life, it is here in the 34th Psalm that he is able to see God in the middle of his storm. He starts off this psalm by saying, I will bless the Lord at all times, and his praise shall continually be in my mouth. David is saying that I have seen God, therefore I can tell you that I will bless him at all times, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what I'm facing, no matter what situation I'm in, no matter what circumstance I'm looking at. God, I can praise you because I've seen you move in my life. David had experienced God for himself. This statement of faith lets us know that it didn't matter what David was going through. He could see God in the middle of his hurricane, in the middle of his Sandy. The same thing must hold true for us today, that no matter what we are facing, God, I see you. Understand that God's goodness was never meant just to be read about in the Bible. God's preference is that we experience his goodness by seeing his goodness. It is God's belief that if I can get you to see me, I know that you will trust me. I know that you will follow me. I know that you will live your life that is pleasing to me if you can just see me right where you are. And it's for that reason alone that we face many issues and or problems in our lives, because it is our responsibility to see God in the middle or in the midst of them all. Do you remember the madman of Gadara? He was in the caves, he was chained and cutting himself. And it was while he was in the cave and while he was cutting himself and while he continued to break the chains off, and while he was in this crazed state, he sees Jesus walking and goes running, and he trusted Jesus. We must follow the same model, see and run. Understand that this man was in a lunatic state, if you will, but he could see God in the middle of his crazed state. And I know it seems like things are going on around you that may seem a little bit crazy, but if you can just see God and run to him, things will be that much better for you. The greatest thing about trusting God is that it will mean that we will have experienced his goodness. We will have seen God in our lives. God is always trying to prove himself trustworthy by allowing us to see his goodness in the middle of calamity. If we have never been sick, how will we ever know that God is a healer? And how can we say that we see you? If we have never been bound, how will we say God is my deliverer? If we have never experienced lack, how will we ever know God to be a provider? God, I see you. So I invite you tonight to look past what's in front of you and see and trust in God.